I understand it is not cheap to sell your house when you want to list it. And there's certainly an appeal to wanting to do it yourself, especially if you've had a lot of experience buying and selling properties. But if you want to go this route, there's definitely a better way to do it. And I would say there is a wrong way to do it. Now, in this video, I want to share with you 2 experiences I've recently had where I had 2 separate buyers buy homes from people who were doing it for sale by owner. And we also refer to that as a FSBO, FSBO. So I'm going to call this video A Tale of 2 FSBOs. Hi, I'm Jill Thomas, and I'm a real estate agent that covers both Sarasota and Manatee Counties here on the west coast of Florida. First, I want to say in this video, I'm not going to beat people up and say, oh, you should never do FSBO, and this is why you should use a real estate agent. I'm not going down that road at all. So please don't think that that's the point of this video. But I do want to share with you some pitfalls to avoid if you do want to go this route. Since this is the tale of 2 FSBOs, I'm going to break down this video into chapters as I tell the story. The first FSBO seller we're going to call Mr. and Mrs. H. Stands for happy and helpful. The other FSBO seller we're going to call Ms. C. She was crabby and had poor communication. So we got Mr. and Mrs. H, helpful and happy. We got Ms. C, crabby and difficult with communication. So here we go. A tale of 2 FSBOs. Chapter 1, listing the house. Both of my recent FSBO experiences were with sellers who listed their homes in the MLS and were offering to pay for the commission for the real estate agent for me. So please, this was not an issue. I didn't have to go and knock on their door, give them a call and say, oh, would you please pay for my commission if I bring a buyer? It was nothing like that. So they welcomed me with open arms in regards to me writing an offer on their house and paying the commission. Chapter 2, scheduling showings. So for trying to get into the house with Ms. C, our crabby and poor communicator, I first had to call her, text her, and finally got permission to go into the house. And then the buyers saw the house, we looked at other homes, and then a few days later, they're like, can we go back again? Well, now the house is vacant, and it ends up that the owner, the seller, lives right around the corner from the house, so it shouldn't have been too much of an issue. Of course, I did get permission to go in again. I just didn't walk in on my own or try to do anything like that. So I contact her and say, hey, can we go look at this house again tomorrow at such and such time? She says, yes, that's fine. So we go to the house and I use the same combination I had from before because it was a manual combo lockbox and it's not working. So I try calling her, texting her, on and on and on. We're standing outside. It's really hot. And then finally she responds and says, oh yeah, we changed the code. Okay, now I get that as a homeowner and you want to be in control of things. I think that's actually pretty smart for her to have done that just so people can't just keep going into the house. And so I think for protection, that was really wise of her to do. So I'm not faulting her for that, but she should have told me that from the get-go. So that wasn't very professional. Now, on the flip side, let's talk about Mr. and Mrs. H, our happy and helpful sellers. Same thing. Now, they lived in the house. It wasn't vacant. And I reach out to them. I say, hey, we want to look at the house. And we show up. Mrs. H is there. She was very helpful. She was able to answer questions. The buyers did have some very specific questions and concerns about how they wanted to use the property. And man, she was all over it, trying to get the right answers so the buyers could feel comfortable. She was constantly texting and emailing me information, and it was a real delight. And honestly, her communication like that didn't stop anywhere from the first showing all the way to closing. It was spot on. She was a pro. Chapter 3, negotiations. Okay, so I submit an offer to Mr. and Mrs. H, our happy and helpful sellers, and I even pointed out some highlights of the contract to them. Now these buyers, in fact, in both cases, the buyers were cash, so there was no mortgages involved, which really simplified the process. But I went through the contract with and gave them the highlights and shared with them some of their responsibilities in the contract. And it took a few days for negotiations to go back and forth with the price and some of the terms, but in the end we got there and we had an executed contract. Miss C, on the other hand, wasn't quite as responsive. So we submit the offer, and with all offers, there are deadlines for the seller to respond. And the seller ignored that, wasn't replying in time. So a couple days after we submitted the offer, you can imagine the buyers are like, okay, when are we going to hear from her? When are we going to hear from her? What's going on? Is she working other deals? So then there's all these other thoughts going on in their heads. And finally, the seller says, oh no, I need my attorney to review the contract. Okay, fine. That's her prerogative. That's okay. Usually that's communicated up front. If anything, in the MLS under Realtor remarks, an agent would write, seller's attorney to review. There's like a seller review period or something like that. So she's like, no, we should have, in a day or two. Okay, fine. So I tell the buyers that, and then a day or two passes. Oh no, the attorney's on vacation, because I'm starting to, request more updates from her. And it's like, no, my attorney's on vacation. It's like, okay, but isn't there another attorney in the law firm? Usually there's more than one person that can review those things. And this is a standard Florida contract. So any attorney who's done this for more than 10 minutes should be able to look at the contract pretty quick and give some feedback on it, because they're all the same. It's just whatever little terms we fill in the blanks, or if we added something else extra, which we didn't do. So then finally the attorney comes back into town and she looks at the contract. So between the time that the offer was originally submitted and we got under contract, it was, I want to say 7-10 days later. It was a really long time. And sadly, I think the seller could have softened the blow a little bit by communicating better up front. And so at this point, the buyers are pretty frazzled by the whole situation. And like I said, you might think, well, it's a seller's prerogative. It's their house. They don't have to respond. They could lose the buyer. And I get that. But as you can imagine, from the buyer's perspective, that's just very nerve-wracking, and you're not setting the stage to make it a positive experience. So as a seller, if there are certain things that you want to do, if you want an attorney to look at something, if there's things that, if you have a certain time frame, or maybe you're going to be on vacation or be out of town for a weekend or whatever, communicate that. Whoever is putting the listing in the MLS, you can have them add stuff in the Realtor remarks, so you can communicate those things up front so you can make this transaction the best that it can be. And honestly, in the over 14 years of doing this, I've just never had a seller be so dismissive like that. It was kind of odd, but that's fine. We got there. And so here we are. So that's my recommendation, is just to be really strong with your communication, be helpful with that, get your ducks in a row. So, when you do get an offer on a property, things can be expedited pretty well, and there's not going to be a lot of delays that could have been avoided. Okay, so you've made it through a good chunk of this video so far, so thanks for watching. Now, did you know that I bring new videos each week about Sarasota real estate and living in the state of Florida? And so some of my videos are long format like this one, but I've just started a new series called Java with Jill, where I just sit back with a cup of coffee and share with you one brief concept, and I'm trying to keep that under 5 minutes. So whether you like the long version or the short version, or like to mix it up, check out my channel for all of those videos, and be sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you don't miss anything. But really, most importantly, when you get to the point where you want to talk more about the details of your situation, on whether or not you want to move to Sarasota, or maybe move out of Sarasota, or you just have some investment property to sell, then give me a call, text, or email me. I'm happy to chat with you and go over those things to see what might be a good fit for you. Chapter 4, inspections. Okay, so both buyers now are under contract. Both buyers hire an inspector to come in and take a look at the homes. And in both cases, there were actually some significant things that were wrong with the homes. It wasn't just, peeling wallpaper or something silly like that. We're talking electric, plumbing. One had some major, outside, some wood rot issues with some water leaking, and they don't know if it was a roof issue or some other type of issue. So these were some bigger things. Now, because the buyers were using the as-is contract, that means that the sellers don't have to make any repairs contractually, but it also means that the buyers can walk away from the home if they do it within the inspection period. So they can go, you know what, I don't like these issues with the house. You're not willing to fix any of them. I'm going to walk. In both cases, the seller said, no, it's the as-is contract. We're not going to make any repairs at all. So you either take it or leave it, buyers. Now, please know that in our area, it's not unusual that even with an as-is contract for a buyer to ask a seller to make some repairs along those lines, because sometimes for a seller, you're better off just keeping the buyer that you've got, keep them happy. You've already gone through a lot with them up to this point and going through showings and just everything that's involved with the process, making these few repairs, keeping the buyers happy and moving forward. Because what happens now is, let's say those buyers walked away. Well, as a seller, whether you're FSBO or not, you are required to disclose anything you know about the property that isn't up to par. So now you're gonna have to tell everybody, okay, well, here's what's wrong with electrical, plumbing, this leak that we don't know where it's coming from, all of these things, maybe problems with the air conditioner or a septic tank, whatever it is, you have to disclose it. And now future buyers might look at that and go, oh my goodness, it's so overwhelming. So in the end, you might be fixing these things no matter what. So just keep that in mind. That's one thing I think that with these sellers in both cases, they weren't being, I guess I want to say, educated or informed or enlightened on how some of the things work in our area. But in both cases, the buyer said, nope, we love these homes enough. We're gonna move forward. So that worked out fine. Okay, so sellers say, no, we're not gonna make these repairs. Buyers say, fine, let's move forward. But some of these issues were big enough that they fell on what we call the 4-point inspection. So this 4-point inspection report is what goes to the insurance agent, because the insurance companies wanna make sure that the house is relatively sound and they're not insuring this hot mess of a house. So the things that fall in the 4-point inspection report has to do with the electric, plumbing, AC, and the roof. And so on both of them, there were some things that came up for the 4-point inspection report. Now, the buyers, because they're paying cash, they don't have to have homeowners insurance, okay? And I actually just did a little 5-minute video clip on that. I just recorded that right before recording this one. So I'm wearing the same shirt. And so you can watch that. It might even be out before this video. So because they're paying cash, they don't have to have homeowners insurance. So the buyers on both cases went back to the sellers and said, hey, here's the 4-point. Would you at least be willing to fix these things so I can get homeowners insurance? Well, Mr. and Mrs. H, our happy and helpful sellers, said, yeah, we'll do that. This stuff isn't that big of a deal. No problem. We're going to get that taken care of for you. Ms. C, on the other hand, said, no way. I'm not doing any of this. Buyers paying with cash. They don't have to have insurance. Too bad. So then the buyer wanted the house enough where he said, well, what if I pay for the repairs prior to closing so I can get insurance? But if something comes up where I don't buy the house, I want the seller to reimburse me for these repairs. So seller agreed, and we went back and forth again with these attorneys for like 3 days before we could do this. And then we had to quickly try to get an electrician and a plumber in to do these repairs. In the end, it was like $800 worth of repairs. It wasn't that much money, but it was just a lot of fuss for all of this. Honestly, I think it probably would have been cheaper for the seller just to have paid for it, because she's paying for this attorney per hour to do all this work. Whereas with the buyer's paying for the attorney for the closing. Well, that's part of like it was already boiled into his expenses. And so it wasn't like he was paying more for the attorney out of pocket to do all these negotiations and write up these addendums and take care of all that. So anyway, we went back and forth on that. And then finally the repairs got done. And keep in mind, if the buyer had walked away and said, no, I'm not going to buy this house, by law, that seller would need to disclose all these problems. But honestly, I don't know if she would have or not. And honestly, I don't have the energy to like chase down all these sellers or other agents who may or may not be doing things appropriately. Although I wouldn't have been surprised if the buyer would have done it and gone after her. But that's a story for another day. Who knows? Chapter 5, closing. First, let's talk about Mr. and Mrs. H, happy and helpful. That closing went so well. So the sellers signed in advance off on all of their closing documents, and then the buyers actually signed in advance as well. They signed electronically and wired their money into the closing agent. Well, during this time, I asked the sellers about the buyers doing a final walkthrough. Well, these sellers had never even heard of somebody doing a final walkthrough before, and I will say that the United States is not their original home of origin. So this one house is the only house that they owned ever. So they're not maybe as familiar with the practices of real estate transactions in the United States. So I reassured them that this is common practice throughout the US, and actually it is in the contract as well. So the buyers are permitted to do that. So once they were aware of that, they go, yeah, no problem, come on over. So we go over there in the morning, the day of the official closing. So even though everything's been pre-signed, you can pre-sign stuff and then not officially close close until, days later. Especially with cash, it's a lot easier. If it's a mortgage, the buyers have to sign that day. But so we go over there and we look at everything. Buyers are happy. They sign a form. I have them sign a form saying, yep, we're okay with the condition of the house. The sellers say, here are the keys. And they showed them a few more things in the house on how to control and deal with things. I tell the attorney who's handling the closing, we're good to go. Everybody's happy and we are done. So that was a really lovely experience. Okay, so then on the other hand, Ms. C, our crabby and less communicative seller, was reluctant about the buyer doing a walkthrough. But of course, again, we lean on the contract. That's the beauty of a well-written contract is, that the contract rules. So nope, contract says we can do the walkthrough. So she agrees to that. I confirm the combo to the lockbox now because I've learned my lesson because we were in and out a bunch of times with the plumber and the electrician and everybody. So I had to keep confirming that with her, what the combination would be. So she says, okay, fine for the buyer to do the walkthrough in the morning. And I know she had previously signed the closing documents. So I communicated with her a day or two in advance and said, okay, would you please take the keys to the house and drop it off at the buyer's attorney's office? Because the attorney is not going to release the keys until everything's done and it's proper and good to go. And that's pretty common for us to do that even when there's agents involved, because if like a seller's not there in town and there's really not a closing for the buyer or for the listing agent to attend, they'll drop off the keys to the attorney's office or the title company. So then when everything's good to go and done, then the buyers can get their keys right away because they own the house at that point. So I asked her to do that. I said, could you please take the keys over to the attorney's office then? So by 12 noon on closing day, so that when he's done signing everything, he can have the keys, and go start enjoying the house. And she refused to do that and said, well, I'm going to take them to my attorney's office. I said, okay, that's fine. Her attorney's office was just a couple blocks away from ours. So, all right, no problem. I mean, a little unusual, but that's okay. Well, for whatever different reasons, the buyers did not sign as early in the day as what we thought. So by the time he wanted the keys, it was maybe like, let's say 2:00 in the afternoon. So we close. The paralegal or the attorney calls the other attorney's office to say, okay, buyer's coming over to grab the keys. And they go, well, we have no keys. Wait, what? So major shock there. The buyer was so upset. And so I start calling the seller, left her a number of messages. I text her a whole lot. And then I tried calling the seller's attorney as well. And of course, could never talk to the attorney directly. I talked to the front receptionist and was nice enough to her. I told her it's not her fault, but I was pretty angry, as you can imagine. And maybe after 45 minutes to an hour, then the seller texts me and says the keys are at the law firm's office. So just very frustrating. That's very, very unusual. It was just not professional at all. There was no reason why she should have been that difficult. She could have dropped off the keys a day or two in advance, even if we just have one key, because in the end, the buyer changed the locks. So that would have been fine, but just to have something. So I'm not sure why she was being so difficult with that. For a buyer who's so excited to get into their house, they closed on a property, they wired their money in, and then not to be able to have access to it, that's very, very unusual for getting the keys to be delayed here in the state of Florida. Okay, Chapter 6. What as a seller can you learn from this? So let's go through a few things. I've sort of already mentioned some of these, but I just want to point them out so it's crystal clear for you. So number one, the contract controls the process. So if you're doing a for sale by owner, or even if you do have a listing agent and you're not sure about something, ask and say, hey, where in the contract is this written that this is the way it is? And the other agent, whether it's your listing agent or the buyer's agent, if that's who you're working with directly, they should be able to say, look at line such and such or paragraph such and such, and really read it. It's pretty clear. Most of the contract is it's not super difficult to translate. And so look at that. Now, like I said, there are some norms, there are some just regional or local ways of doing things that still fall within the boundaries of the contract. So if another agent tells you, well, this is normal, it doesn't mean that you have to do it, but I would definitely lean into that a little bit just because that kind of helps to keep things smooth. The deal could fall apart because of that. So just understand that every time you say no, and if you say it a lot during the process, you could put the transaction at risk. Okay. So just know what you're up against before you make decisions. Okay. Like I said, you don't have to do those things, but just slow down and think about it a little bit. All right. Number 2, sellers. Okay, when you're working with this other agent, this buyer's agent, please don't think that every buyer's agent out there is wanting to take advantage of you and try to pull the wool over your eyes. When I was going through both of these processes, regardless of the seller and their attitude or their demeanor, I was really trying to be helpful. Like, here, now I want you to understand this is what the contract says. This is where we're at. Here are our deadlines. Let's make sure that we're on the same page, kind of thing. And I truly was wanting to be helpful. Like, I wasn't looking to take advantage of anybody at all. But we've got to go by, again, that's why we go by the contract. And then the other thing too is I also made them aware of consequences. So that's okay if you do this, but this could potentially happen. And so I just wanted to make sure, and I put everything out on the table, because later on, I don't want somebody coming after me, trying to accuse me of lying or being deceitful or something like that. I value my name and my reputation. And so I tried to be as helpful with all parties as I could. Now, not all agents are going to be that good with communication. Doesn't mean that they're trying to be deceitful at all, but maybe they're not going to be quite as helpful. So you might want to consider getting a real estate attorney to represent you throughout the transaction, and they can give you some direction as well. All right, number 3, solid communication, and honestly, just being a little bit kind goes a long way. Being kind, sharing information as things come up, share that with the other party, talk about it, because there could be some things going on that if you don't share something, it could put you into hot water, and ignorantly, you don't want to put yourself in a position where you can get yourself into trouble and you're not even aware that that's what you're doing to yourself. Being kind isn't a sign of weakness or being a pushover. You can always say no to a request, but you can do it in a kind way, a professional way. I think that's really part of it too, is just trying to be professional. If you're going to do this on your own, which is totally fine, treat it like you would want me to act or another agent to act. Just be professional about things. If something happens and you cannot fulfill something that you agreed to do, please let the other party know right away. A lot of things can be tolerated. There's time to work things out as long as that communication is there and the other party knows that you're trying or you're really working on it. So again, kindness, communication, man, just goes so far in a real estate transaction. Okay, Chapter 7, what buyers can learn from this tale of two FSBOs. Early on in both of these transactions, I warned each set of buyers that because I wasn't working with another agent, things could go funky, things could be a little bit different, a little bit weird, just because I didn't know who I was dealing with on the other end. I didn't know their knowledge of real estate transactions. I didn't know their skill set or anything like that at all. I recently was working with some other buyers and I was showing them homes and communication with them on a regular basis. And all of a sudden they went dark for a couple of weeks. And I text her and I said, hey, what's going on? And she goes, oh, well, I'm buying another property, but we're not using any real estate agents. And I said, okay, that's fine. And then a couple weeks later, she comes back to me and she goes, oh, Jill, it was horrible. And so she told me the story that she was working with somebody else who was doing for sale by owner. So just no other agents, nobody else involved at all. And the seller was in Georgia and he wanted them to send him money up in Georgia for him to hold for the deposit. And there was all these other crazy things, lots of red flags. And they were very uncomfortable about it all. And they just were like, okay, we just can't do this. We don't understand what's going on. And it's been like 30 years since these buyers had bought or sold anything. So they were pretty green, and they haven't done anything for a long time. So thankfully they went with their gut and just didn't move forward with this deal, and they call me back and then everything's good. So that was pretty scary for them. They could have potentially lost a lot of money because of that. So just beware. In a real estate transactions, individuals never hold money in escrow and they never hold the deposit. It's got to go to the closing agent, a title company, an attorney, somebody. So just as a buyer, please just be cautious when you're doing, if you find a for sale by owner somewhere online. It could be a great transaction. I'm not saying it can't work out, but just be very, very cautious. Now, I'm sad to say that even when there's a licensed agent on each side of the transaction, there can still be problems, there can still be headaches, there can still be hiccups, but at least when you're dealing with another agent, there's somebody else that you can go to. Somebody's accountable for that person. So whether I go to their broker or my broker goes to their broker or something like that, right? There are consequences if another licensed professional is acting unsavory in some way. So it's not that there can never be problems at all when you've got two licensed agents, but at least there's some more immediate consequences. With our one difficult seller, there was nobody else I could go to. Who do I go to say that, she's being a pain in the neck and she's frustrating everybody and she's doing everything wrong and outside the norm and all that? There was nothing we could do. Our hands were tied, and so we had to muddle through the whole transaction. We made it, but yikes, it was a little rough at times, because obviously I'm not telling you every little detail of these stories. So in conclusion, if you want to try to sell a property yourself, then like I've been saying, just communicate well, be kind, ask questions, answer questions in a timely fashion. Like I said, there's nothing wrong with you asking a lot of questions about the process or anything like that. Try to be on the same page and try to strike that balance between being gracious and still being cautious, just because you want to protect yourself and protect your interests as well. And like I'd already said, maybe consider getting a real estate attorney to represent you in the transaction and to lean on them for questions. And I think that might be helpful for you. Now, if you're thinking about selling and you go, okay, Jill, I don't know if I'm comfortable enough doing a for sale by owner, then please give me a call. I'd be happy to answer your questions and talk to you and look at your property and see if we might be a good fit to work together so we can get that property of yours listed and sold with as few headaches to keep it as smooth as possible. I also did a series of videos a while back about questions to ask an agent if you're interviewing agents about when you want to list your property. So some of those videos, I'm going to drop the links for those below in the description. All right, guys, thank you so much for watching A Tale of Two Fizbos. I hope you have a great day.